Sometime after midnight on the 14th of February 1950, a Convair B-36B United States Air Force serial number 44-92075, assigned to the U.S. 7th Bombardment Wing, Heavy, at Carswell United States Air Force Base in Texas, crashed in the northwestern British Columbia on Mount Colleget after jettisoning a Mark IV nuclear bomb. The crash became as famous as the first Broken Arrow, a U.S. military term for an accident involving a nuclear weapon. Questions swirled for decades about whether the bomb was really detonated over the ocean, or whether it went missing somewhere in the Canadian wilderness. The B-36B had been en route from Ellison Air Force Base near Fairbanks, Alaska, to Carswell's AFB, more than 3,000 miles southeast, on a mission that included a simulated nuclear attack on San Francisco. Convair B-36B 44-92075 was flying on a simulated nuclear strike combat mission against the Soviet Union. The Convair B-36B, codenamed Peacemaker, was the first true intercontinental bomber capable of carrying nuclear weapons to any part of the world. The U.S. Strategic Air Command was eager to test the new planes with a real payload. The aircraft carried a Mark IV atomic bomb, a weapon comparable only in size to the nuke dropped on Nagasaki in 1945, containing a substantial quantity of natural uranium and 5,000 pounds, or almost 3,000 kilos, of conventional explosives. After months of lobbying, SAC leaders were able to convince the Atomic Energy Commission to lend them a Mark IV atomic bomb without its plutonium core necessary for a nuclear detonation. The B-36 took off on the 13th of February 1950 from the Eielson FAB with a regular crew of 15 plus a weaponeer and a bomb commander. The plan for the 24-hour flight was to fly over the North Pacific, due west of the Alaska Panhandle in British Columbia. Then the plan was to head inland over Washington State and Montana. Here, the B-36 would climb to 4,000 feet, or 12,000 meters, for a simulated bomb run to Southern California and then to San Francisco. It would continue its non-stop flight to Fort Worth, Texas. The flight plan did not include any penetration of Canadian airspace. But things didn't go as planned. Seven hours into the flight, ice began to accumulate on the bomber's fuselage, and the excess weight put tremendous strain on the engines, 3 of which caught fire and had to be shut down. The subsequent investigation blamed ice buildup in the carburetor air intakes. With only 3 functioning engines, the B-36 began to lose altitude at a rate of 500 feet per minute. Captain Harold Barry and his crew acted quickly. Their first order was to ditch the atomic bomb, following military protocol to keep nuclear weapons or their components out of enemy hands. However, when Barry's co-pilot hit the salvo button to release the bomb, nothing happened. He then hit it a second time, releasing the bomb bay doors and dropping the Mark IV over the Pacific, where, according to the crew reports, its conventional explosives were detonated and the bomb destroyed. The USAF later stated that the fake practice core on board the aircraft was inserted into a weapon before it was dropped. Barry subsequently set the failing plane's autopilot to steer it on a course towards the open ocean, while he and his crew parachuted into the darkness over Princess Royal Island on the coast of British Columbia. The abandoned B-36 cruised for another 200 miles, veering off its set course and crashing into the snowy flank of Mount Colleget, deep in the Canadian wilderness. The aircraft had been in constant radio contact with Strategic Air Command headquarters at Offutt, AFB, Nebraska, and within minutes of the bailout, the Royal Canadian Air Force launched Operation Bricks. Thanks to their efforts, 12 of the 17 crew members were recovered alive, including one man found dangling upside down from his parachute in a tree with a broken ankle. But 5 crewmen, including the weaponeer, Captain Theodore Schreier, were never found. The 5 crew members lost were co-pilot Captain Theodore F. Schreier, navigator Captain William Phillips, bombardier First Lieutenant Holly L. Askell, gunner Staff Sergeant Neo A. Straley, and finally gunner Staff Sergeant Albert W. Pollard. One of the 5 deceased, the weaponeer, was rumored to have been recovered 4 years later in 1954 at the crash site. The remaining 4 airmen were believed to have bailed out of the aircraft earlier than the surviving crew members, and it was assumed they landed in the ocean and died of hypothermia. Canadian authorities were never told that the aircraft was carrying a nuclear weapon. The U.S. military interviewed the crew, who each agreed with Captain Barry's report that the Mark IV was safely detonated before the crash. Meanwhile, the search continued for the wreckage of Flight 2075. The only way to confirm if the airman's story was true, the U.S. Air Force search team couldn't find a trace of the downed plane and assumed it had been crashed into the Pacific. But 3 years later, a Canadian rescue operation searching for a missing oil prospector spotted the wreckage atop Mount Colleget. About 50 miles, 80 kilometers east of the Alaskan border, roughly due east of the towns of Stewart, British Columbia, and Hyder in Alaska, on the east side of the isolated Nass Basin, northwest of Hazelton, British Columbia. The United States Air Force immediately began an investigation. A team was sent in September 1953, as effort was given a high priority, but then they failed to reach the site after 19 days of trudging through the wilderness. Finally, in August 1954, a small demolition crew reached the downed B-36 and proceeded to strip the plane of any classified equipment and destroy it. Theories proliferate about the lost nuke. Were there clues in the wreckage that the bomb had in fact been released prior to the impact? In the absence of definitive proof, rumors began to swirl about the true fate of that lost nuke. At the epicenter of these rumors was Captain Schreier, the missing weaponeer. First, there was a rumor that a body was found with the wreckage on Mount Colleget. What if it was Schreier's? The weaponeer was a former airline pilot and could have attempted to fly the plane back to Alaska when the others had bailed out. A second claimed that Captain Barry had seen the bomber turn sharply soon after he had leapt into the midnight sky. The story began to circulate that the bomb never left the plane, and that Schreier died trying to get it back to the safety of the Air Force Base. None of the rumors were confirmed by the military. In 1956, 2 civilian surveyors chanced on the wreck and noted its exact location, which otherwise remained unknown for the next 40 years. In 1997, one of the surveyors provided the coordinates to 2 distinct expeditions, one American and one led by the Canadian Department of National Defense, seeking to conduct an environmental analysis of the site. Both expeditions reached the wreck around the same time, and the members of those expeditions were apparently the first humans to set foot in the area since 1956. The Canadian-led mission found no unusual radiation levels. In late 1998, the Canadian government declared the site protected. A portion of one of the gun turrets is on display at the Bulky Valley Museum in Smithers, British Columbia. In 2003, an investigative team led by John Clearwater found something interesting. While the crash and ensuing demolition destroyed much of the equipment in the bomb bay, the bomb shackle, which is what held the weapons suspended there, remained impressively intact. Clearwater and his team concluded that if the bomb had gone down with the rest of the plane, and the shackle remained in such good condition, there would have been some clear evidence of the bomb in the wreckage, but there wasn't. In late October of 2016, a diver reported that he had found something that looked like a segment of a partially disarmed Mark IV nuclear bomb, the same bomb that the co-pilot had said they had dumped before the crash. The location near Pitt Island in the Inside Passage was mistakenly reported as off Haida Gwaii. The Royal Canadian Navy later confirmed that the item was not the Mark IV bomb. The more conventional explanation of the fate of America's first broken arrow was likely the truth. The only remains of the detonated Mark IV rested deep on the ocean floor. The crash of Flight 2075 may have been the first broken arrow, but it wasn't the last. Clearwater writes that in the first 23 years of the atomic age alone, the US and Soviet Union jettisoned or accidentally released 23 other lost nukes.